Hello there and welcome to Creative Connections. I'm Veronica and I'm an artist educator, and today I'm going to be sharing with you about one of my favorite art mediums, watercolors. When I first started using watercolors, I began experimenting with watercolor pencils. I was never very confident about using a paintbrush, and the idea of splashing some water with a paintbrush and some paint pigments just overwhelmed me. And if you are like me, I would highly recommend you starting with watercolor pencils just to build some confidence, and because watercolor pencils give you much more freedom in terms of control. And you can just, it's just like using an ordinary pencil or a color pencil. So what you would need to do is just use it like a pencil, and then you can dab your paintbrush in some water, and just go over it on a piece of paper and begin playing around with it. So I would highly recommend using watercolor pencils if you are not very confident in starting out with paints. Watercolors come in different forms. So apart from watercolor pencils, you can get them in pans, in little pans, which come in a set like this, or sometimes you could get in where they come in little round pellets from the art supply shop. You would find that there's quite a range of watercolor paints available in the shops, and they do vary in price. The reason for this is due to the amount of pigmentation in each of the different watercolors that you're able to get in the shops. So for example, in Winsor Newton, you get a different range. You've got, they have a Cotman range, which is more, which is slightly cheaper than say the professional range. And then you've got the ones in the pans. They vary in terms of pigmentation, the color pigmentation in them. If you're just starting out, don't worry about you trying to buy the most expensive one that's available. Just get ones that you are able to currently afford and use them regularly. If you do buy something that's more expensive, you do remember that they do last for a long time, because you only need a little bit when you're using. So the point is, use what you've got. You buy what you can afford at this point, and begin experimenting. The whole important thing to remember is to keep using. And like I said, if watercolor pencils just as great and just as a good way to start if you're just starting out. Another thing to think about in terms of watercolors, if you go to the shop and you find there's a whole range of paper that you could possibly purchase to use. For watercolors, they work really well in thicker paper generally, but that's just not to say that you can't use it on thinner paper. So I have here a book that is less than 200 GSM. That's the weight of the paper, and I have used watercolors on them. And this is a book here that my art journal, my travel journal, where I've used watercolors in them. Now, I had to be careful because the paper is not as thick. They tend to, I had to avoid using too much water on them. You would find that they actually, you can see that they're sort of expanded a little bit. So my book's gotten a bit thicker. But I'm happy with that, and I've worked with that. You can get watercolor that's paper that's thicker. Watercolor papers, you've got different bits, different information on it. So you've got the weight. That's one thing you need to be thinking about, the weight. And I personally would recommend 300 GSM. And it would also indicate some other points. So for example, it says textured paper. So what this basically essentially means is that the paper is that you're purchasing has a bit of a texture, so a bit of a rough texture, as opposed that's not slightly rough texture. Okay, that's showing up better on the screen. Slightly textured, And what it means is that the paper is not as smooth like the paper in, say, your on you know, where it doesn't have any texture. So what it means that when it's textured, it's got little holes, little bit wobbly bits, and when you're painting it with water, it sits on the paper and it forms a nice sort of, gives a bit of a texture. Whereas if it's smooth, it would just glide on the paper, and you would not have any elements of a bit of, you know, wobbly texture on it. You can also tell if a watercolor paper that you're purchasing is textured or not is by looking at the label on the front of the paper, and if it's textured, it would be indicated by the term cold press, and if it's smooth, it would be hot pressed. There are also other types of paper that's available. Something to keep in mind and to be careful about is you get brands in the shops, you know, saying that it's suitable for mixed media, and it does some of them do say that, oh, you can use watercolors on them. Just keep in mind that, that looking at the weight of the paper, so 200 GSM is fairly thick, but it's not going to be as thick as, say, of a higher of 300 GSM, a paper that's 300 GSM. So your paper might go a bit, you know, sort of wobbly on it, and be prepared for that. All right, if you've got any questions, please do feel free to email me, and I hope you enjoy this little session. Thank you.